Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We will be discussing our 2022 field season takeaways that will influence the future work of our council. We hope that by sharing these lessons that we've learned, we will all be able to have more successful approaches in our efforts to control invasive species on PEI. My name's Cassidy. I'm a technician with the PEI Invasive Species Council, and I have been with them since June of 2021, when full-time permanent staff became possible for us thanks to our financial support of the wonderful funders we have. This presentation and much of the work throughout our year was made possible by the PEI Forested Landscape Priority Place for Species at Risk initiative. Today's presentation will be divided into 5 sections. I will index these in the description so that you may hop around as you find most useful. I will start by discussing who we are and briefly going over some of the most basics to understanding invasive species. In section 2, we will discuss invasive species monitoring. In section 3, we will discuss management and tools we like to use. In section 4, I will highlight some of the considerations we have going into 2023. And in the final section, section 5, I will briefly highlight some of the most concerning invasives on the horizon. So who are we? We're a group of volunteer individuals from a number of organizations who are knowledgeable and interested in invasive species. This council was formed back in 2007 and has a diverse membership. We have retired biologists, retired fishermen and mussel growers. We also have great representation from the federal government, including Canadian Food Inspection Agency representatives, Parks Canada, research scientists with the Agricultural and Agri-Food Canada. We also have provincial representation. We have a forestry conservation specialist, a watershed ecologist, and representation from the municipalities from the city of Charlottetown. We also, of course, have nonprofit groups like Ducks Unlimited Canada, Nature Conservancy Canada, Island Nature Trust, the PEI Watershed Alliance, and Watershed Group representation. In addition to that, we also have a small but growing staff. Over the summer, we had 2 full-time positions, 1 summer student, and a contract position. We are happy to announce that this contract position was hired on recently as a full-time employee, which brings us to 3 full-time employees. This is great news for our goals as an organization because invasive species never sleep, and so year-round staff to further this goal is essential. Our council recently became a chapter of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, which is a national nonprofit working to mitigate the effects of invasive species at a national scale. We're now one of 11 chapters that span from coast to coast. Together, we deliver joint messaging, including a set of take-action campaigns targeted at reducing the spread of invasives. We meet monthly to discuss ongoings within our organizations and maintain relationships in the field across the country. We have many goals as a council. We aim to assemble the views of a broad range of experts. We aim to provide leadership, expertise, and advice on the management of invasive species. We hope to foster awareness and understanding on invasive species issues on PEI. We also serve as a respected repository and source of credible information. We identify gaps in existing knowledge required for effective planning. And we liaise and partner with other groups and agencies working on invasive species. It is, of course, our goal to identify potential funding opportunities to further our committee's work. And we also always hope to encourage the public, government, and industry to become active in the prevention, detection, and where appropriate, eradication of invasive species. So what is an invasive species? An invasive species is an organism that has become established outside of its native range, has a tendency to spread, and causes ecological, economical, or social problems. Not all species that are introduced to PEI will become invasive. These species that don't cause these types of harm and spread are known as exotic species. It is important to note that exotic species may become invasive at a later time, especially with climate change. So what makes an invasive species successful? They have a lack of natural controls in their environment, like predators, competitors, diseases, or weather. And they also have traits that give them an advantage over others. So for example, they might have broad habitat requirements or be allelopathic, which means that they can release biochemicals into the soil that inhibit the growth of other plants. So this species on the right is known as Asiatic bittersweet. It's a vining plant that can reach great heights. It damages trees because it, first of all, girdles them as it climbs up, but then it also causes heavy weight. And in the winter, when all the snow and ice accumulates on these trees, it snaps them. So it's clear It's outside of its native range, it's spreading rapidly. It causes ecological harm for sure. It can cause economical harm to the forestry trade and social problems because walking through these woods and then trying to enjoy your day you'd be good not to trip. So it also has broad habitat requirements. It can grow over dunes and fields, and it also is allelopathic. And so while invasive species exhibit many of these different traits, native species can inhibit them too. They just normally only have a few of these traits that give them such an advantage. So as mentioned, invasive species impact the environment, the economy, and our social health. Environmentally, they are actually the second leading cause of biodiversity loss globally. They replace diverse systems with single species stands. Invasives also become predators, competitors, parasites, hybridizers, and diseases to our native and domesticated plants and animals. They also reduce habitat by changing soil chemistry, reducing soil organisms, displacing food for wildlife, and altering our water cycles. Economically, they impact industry, like the forestry sector, which experiences overall decline in harvest, quality, and regeneration, while increasing fire hazards and erosion. The agricultural sector experiences a reduced crop yield due to competition, which results in an increase of herbicide usage. Their crops are also susceptible to diseases and insects that piggyback on imported plants. Invasives can also impact infrastructure, like Japanese knotweed, which can penetrate foundations and pavement, or also species like yellow flag iris, which seeds clog up ditches. It's also expensive to control invasive species, especially once they've reached a point of long-term control. They also impact trade restrictions, as we've seen with the potato wart here on PEI. Socially, they harm people because of a loss of income, a loss of traditional food and medicine plants. They can negatively impact human health, and they also limit recreational opportunities. To limit the impact of invasive species, we follow a guiding principle known as having an early detection and rapid response, which is a strategic process to prevent the establishment of invasives to new areas. Understanding the distribution of invasive species on PEI is essential to supporting these efforts, and so we are very grateful to all who were able to make reports of invasive species during the 2022 field season. As you can imagine, gathering distributions at a province-wide scale requires a province-wide effort. In 2022, we received about 150 reports directly through either email or Facebook, and many more through EdMaps and iNaturalist. We're so grateful, again, to all these people who've supported our efforts. Our staff and council members were quite busy practicing our ID skills as we verify each report by photos or site visits when necessary. Remember, as many photos as you can send along is very helpful to us. Especially taking photos of the surrounding area is important so that we might get an idea of what the site conditions are like. So what does our staff get up to during the year? Our staff works towards the prevention of new species introductions by focusing on education and raising awareness about certain priorities. This could be in the form of presentations or having booths at different events, creating informational posters and updates on our social media, or holding demonstration activities to showcase certain best management practices. We also provide guidance to the island by developing documents like fact sheets and guides that support similar efforts. We also attend workshops to stay up to date on industry news and trends, and keep priority lists updated for invasive species concerns that are specific to PEI. Some of the ways our staff works towards the early detection of new species is by confirming identification of reports made by the public and performing monitoring activities of our own. We strive to have a rapid response to new invaders. We do have a capacity to conduct management efforts on priority invaders if the possibility for eradication exists. If species are widespread, it's unlikely we'll have a large capacity to do management, but we're always happy to help decide on best management practices and create site-specific plans for those interested. As mentioned, we can also assist by performing demonstrations for organizations on certain techniques to further this. Since we were formed in 2007, the Council has always been interested in monitoring for invasive species distributions across PEI. and this was no different for the 2022 field season. There are two ways to categorize monitoring efforts. First, I will talk on the opportunistic monitoring that is happening. Opportunistic monitoring is done when individuals or organizations come upon invasive species when they're conducting other activities. For example, recreationalists like kayakers might report aquatic species while they're out, whereas watershed groups might record invasive species found along their banks during their stream clearing. While our staff does make reports of invasive species in their travels, we rely heavily on citizen scientists who are out reporting these species. Most of the reports we get are for common species like Japanese knotweed, and they are easy to identify. We do occasionally get reports that are often misidentified. For example, giant hogweed. However, this species has a very small known distribution on PEI. It does have several lookalikes, including cow parsnip and woodland angelica. We never discredit reports of the species, as it's important to our island we accurately identify any early detection so we can have a rapid response. All this data is valuable and essential to helping us make effective management decisions. When it comes to opportunistic monitoring, the pros are that it covers a large area and can be done year-round when people have the opportunity. The cons are that it's not repeated in the same way each year to check the progress of the site over time. Reporters might also be distracted and not thinking about it, or they might not find time in their activities despite having the intention to initially. I thought it would be interesting to highlight an example of one of our most interesting finds this season that came about from opportunistic monitoring. This story starts back in 2021 while our staff and chair were out visiting a management demonstration site in Georgetown on Asiatic bittersweet. We had driven past a yellow shrub that we had taken note of, and we pulled over to investigate it further. It turned out to be Scotch broom, which is a priority invasive species that is not widely distributed across PEI. We recorded the species in a naturalist and drove around the area and found a few more in ditches, which we recorded as well, of course. At the time, these were actually the only species that had been entered into iNaturalist. Fast forward to the 2022 field season, staff had gone out to arrange a visit to the site to pull some species out of the ditches to prevent it from spreading further. Our staff's experience has really grown over the past few years, and one of the things we always make sure to do, even if we've seen the site before now, is to do another walk around the site to be thorough and see if we can investigate where something is coming from. Upon arrival, we observed the species had spread into more areas in the ditch than had been observed the year before. We had also found an area where it extended into an open disturbed area, and we followed it to find a large patch. I will play this video so you can see what we discovered in real time. So as you can see, the shrub is taller than clay. Spruce and pine is trying to go amongst it, but it's being outcompeted by the Scotch broom. This patch was very large. It extended much further than we would have realized had we not taken the opportunity to walk it. So after discovering this large of a patch, we had a discussion on how to proceed at the site. We both agreed that management was certainly still worthwhile in the ditches to prevent species from spreading further, as they have exploding seed pods that can shoot their seeds 5 meters outwards. Our goal shifted from totally getting rid of this patch to containing it until we could get in touch with the landowners and form a strategy that would work for the site in a more permanent way. This is a great example of how important it can be to familiarize ourselves with invasive species that are not yet widespread on PEI, and how important it is to make reports to us at the council so we can investigate these further when necessary. If you are doing some opportunistic monitoring while driving, we remind you it's extremely important to be aware of other cars on the road and to pull over safely. And this is a picture of Clay having dug out one from the ditch. It's quite big, as you can see. So next, we'll discuss systematic monitoring and our experience with it this field season. Systematic monitoring is taking a methodical, planned-out approach to surveying and recording data so that the information gathered would be useful from year to year. It can be done by anyone, but is most often done by groups that have an obligation to detect invasive species like our council or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Some pros to this type of monitoring is that surveys are repeatable and done over a period of time so that invasives can be caught quickly. Time will be set aside for details that help give the fuller picture of the site. The cons would be that it needs to be planned for, and it also requires dedicated time set aside. This past field season, we had the opportunity to standardize our approach to this type of monitoring as we performed surveys in partnership with Ducks Unlimited and provincial parks. In designing our approach, we quickly came to realize that monitoring for invasive species is quite different than traditional monitoring efforts, as invasive species are not randomly distributed. We received advice on important considerations from Kate McCory with Forest Fish and Wildlife and from Sean Blaney with the Atlantic Canadian Conservation Data Center. We took these suggestions and created our own process. Our plan of action was to divide sites up into smaller sizes. Before going out in the field, we took time to examine each site with satellite maps using Gaia, which is a web-based platform. We used tools in this application to divide the areas up into sections based on the land use. This satellite image is part of the provincial park known as Cabot Park. You can see the 5 sections divided up. We walked each section for 20 minutes, but reset the clock each time an invasive species was found or until we walked the whole section. Before going out, we also checked iNaturalist or EdMaps ahead of time to see what invasives someone may have already reported in the area so we could be on alert. We recorded this information on our maps before we went out. We printed this map and taped it to the back of a clipboard. The clipboard held physical data sheets that we developed. This is what our sheets look like. Staff's technical experience helped them identify that recording on paper and using a GPS in the field was a faster method than identifying each into an app, and also left our phone battery available for recording pictures. At each invasive observed, staff recorded the waypoint and details. So you can see in the left-hand column of the bottom part of the survey data sheet is where we would have recorded those waypoints. We took pictures of each species that we observed, unless there was lots of the same species that it would not have benefited our data. Details recorded was information like size of the infestation, what stage the plant might be in, for example, seed, flower, or immature. And also we recorded any large patches with polygon sizes and counts estimates. So this is what our data sheet looks like. As you can see, we used pencil to fill it out. This is important because if it got wet with pen, that would run. So on the left-hand side, you can see we filled out our coordinates there with the waypoint numbers. So it's important to put both down on paper in case something ever happened to your GPS where it deleted all of your records for some reason, and then you didn't have those to upload into the field later. You could at least manually put them in. Yeah, so this, you can see at the top too, we also put the crew that had been making these recordings so that in the future, if there was any questions, we could be the ones asked about them. It's important as you go as well to take pictures of these sheets because, you know, right after we took this one, actually, it had blown away without us noticing. It was a very windy day by the shore. And so we were glad to not have to do those parts over again. So this next slide is what it looks like when you get it uploaded into the field, after the field in the office. We use we could upload them from our GPS using Basecamp and putting them into a KML format and then into Gaia. So this orange line that you see kind of all over the campground, that's our route we walked. We had the GPS set up to track our route so that we could walk that next year. The red points we color-coded to be invasive species points. The orange ones were native species that we wanted to take note of. The trees are circled in different colors if you can see the one in the far left corner and then the one in the top right. The one in the top right circled with red. That's because that tree was defoliated and we took lots of pictures and ID it later in the field as it was a concern. Whereas the one in the bottom left was a tree of ecological significance. It was actually a black ash tree, and so it's a site we might want to monitor in the future. And then, of course, we marked our starting point with a star symbol. The red one was where we started. And then the green one at the top there is a trail entrance point that we wanted to take note of for future staff who might be coming to the site with a new perspective to it. So this is what it looks like when you click on one of the waypoints. You can see on the left here, it has notes that you can add in. So it says scattered dense patches of bittersweet nightshade plants, immature and mature berries. And you can also add photos in here, which is great, except we will warn you to not spend too much time at that because for some reason Gaia one day just deleted all the photos we had inputted. So instead now we keep them in an album and just number them in correlation with the GPS waypoint. We may change our mapping tool going forward for these type of surveying, but it is a great placeholder for now, and you can export this data into KML formats to be used in other platforms. So after each survey, staff interpreted the results from each and provided management advice from the sites. This coming season, if we're successful in our funding, we are looking forward to discussing these strategies further with staff at these areas and surveying further, especially after Fiona, to see how these species may have taken over areas with toppled trees. Invasive species management can be conducted year-round. However, it's important to always consider how specific management timings can impact native species and how your strategy is likely to be successful for that effort during that time of year. Woody plants like glossy buckthorn can be controlled outside of the growing season, in winter and spring using girdling. It's a very effective strategy that will prevent seed set. Planning for activities like this outside of the growing season will perhaps make management more possible for groups, as there are many competing priorities during the growing season and resources during these times are limited. It's equally important to consider the impact it can have on wildlife and native plants and the likelihood of disease transmission, among other things. I will highlight two specific considerations that are very important to consider. The reproduction timings of wildlife is especially important to consider, as there are legal obligations we have to these species during these times. Of course, none of us in conservation want to disturb these species anyways, but it's still good to remember these obligations. General nesting season on PEI runs from mid-April to late August. It's extremely important to ensure that whatever management you're undergoing during this time does not have a negative impact on these species. While monitoring, avoid trampling on ground nesters by walking on cleared ground when possible. Avoid disturbing plant species known to be popular hosts for nesting birds. Consider the specific plant you intend to remove. It's best to remove favored species outside of the nesting season, or to choose control methods that are not invasive like girdling. Multiflora rose, blackthorn, buckthorn, and even giant hogweed are known as popular nesting hosts. Staff last year in the 2022 field season even found nests amongst Japanese knotweed. If you must conduct work, walk the site first carefully and flag any areas to avoid, and make sure you work slowly. If you find a nest, you must leave it alone. Some birds nest in grasslands, which include agricultural fields like hayfields. One such species is the at-risk bird known as bobolink. This species arrives as early as May. It is important, if you're going to manage invasive species in their nesting habitat, that you leave their young time to fledge. An appropriate time to conduct management in a field would be around mid-July. When possible, it's always important to avoid walking in streams or disturbing the edges of a stream, as they are home to all sorts of life, like fish and macroinvertebrates. It's always important to choose techniques in these areas that limit erosion. If you are dealing with large infestations of invasive plants that offer canopy or soil stabilization, create a multi-year site plan to work in sections to prevent having a dramatic and sudden impact on streams. Even invasive vegetation can provide cover needed to protect water temperatures from direct sunlight and aquatic life from predation. Our native salmonids, brook trout and Atlantic salmon, are anadromous fish, meaning they return to freshwater streams on PEI to reproduce and spawn. It's important to avoid walking in streams during these sensitive periods to protect their eggs and alevin and ensure their population remains stable, as they already face many challenges on PEI. Spawning begins in October, and the fish do not emerge from their gravel until the end of May. Watershed group permits on PEI allow groups to begin management and riparian areas in June for this reason. Macroinvertebrates are another life form to protect in a stream. They are often overlooked by many, but they are a healthy component of a stream and offer many ecosystem services. A macroinvertebrate is an insect in its larval form. An example of a macroinvertebrate would be a caddisfly, which is pictured on the right. These in particular offer many ecosystem services to a stream. They are filter feeders and release large particles that can be used as food for other inhabitants. They also serve as a food source themselves for fish. It's a great example of why we need to take care when we're walking in streams to avoid that when possible, as not all macroinvertebrates are as easily observed as these. Any work done in a watercourse, buffer zone, or wetland must receive a permit before work is started to ensure no negative environmental consequences will occur during management. This past field season, we had the opportunity to manage many species, some of which were return species for our staff, and many of which were new. I will discuss in the next upcoming slides the different species we managed and highlight the tools we used, the techniques we used, and any other takeaways that we may have found during the process. This is garlic mustard. It is a biennial, which means it lives for 2 years. It's herbaceous, meaning it's not woody, and it has a first and second year plant that look different from each other. First year plants are low growing. They're a rosette with kidney-shaped leaves that have scalloped edges. The second year flowering plants grow 1 meter tall with a white umbel of flowers. The leaves smell strongly of garlic, which help in its identification, as there are some lookalikes to the first year plant. First year leaves persist into the winter and are visible when the snow melts before other plants emerge. This species is not yet widespread on PEI, but it is known in a few places, including the site in Stratford we're managing in someone's backyard. We began assisting at the site in 2021 and have returned several times a year to keep up on it. Our goal is to prevent this plant from producing any second-year plants that can produce seeds, as this can only spread by seed. Our strategy is to remove its root system. Pulling the root out in its entirety ensures the root cannot grow back any above-ground growth. You can see in the middle photo, the root is a light-colored and also is in an S shape. It doesn't get much bigger than that in its first year. Pulling this out by hand would be a lengthy process. Luckily, our chair was familiar with a tool that could help us, and she recommended it to our team. This tool is a stirrup-hoe, a gardening tool designed to remove weeds from soil by pulling up the roots from the soil. It consists of a long handle with a metal blade attached at a right angle to the handle. The blade is shaped like a stirrup, with the bottom edge sharpened and curved forward. Its curve is a very important part of the tool, as the curve allows for shallow roots to be dug up instead of sliced into. This tool is narrow enough to allow the user to be selective in their plant removal so that you can leave native species behind to recolonize the site. It will save you countless hours of weeding and is worthy investment to any toolbox. These range in price starting at around $40 at Canadian Tire, although these are just action tools, which have straight edges. If you could find someone to bend the tool, it would be an affordable option. Otherwise, we haven't noticed any local or even Canadian retailers that sell it specifically bent this way. Johnny Seeds is a US company that sells them at $85 Canadian. It would cost you $26 in standard shipping, and with tax, that would mean it would come to $125 if you were planning to incorporate it into your budget. I want to show you a video here of someone using it. You can see it's pulling up the roots with it. Definitely makes light white of weeding. So this is giant hogweed. Many of you may be familiar with it due to its famous sap, which causes burns. So it's a phototoxic sap. If you were to get it on your skin and then the sunlight was to hit your skin with that sap on it, it would result in a burn, and they can be quite severe. It's important we stay on top of this plant as it has a very limited distribution across PEI. It does have many lookalikes, including a native species called cow parsnip, which looks most similar. You can tell them apart by looking at the stems. Both of these stems pictured here are of giant hogweed. You can see the purple blotching on it is raised, and this is what makes it indicative from cow parsnip. Cow parsnip might have purple, but it won't be raised like that. This species, like garlic mustard, only spreads by seed. It's a short-lived monocarpic perennial, which is a technical way of describing that it lives for a few years until it flowers. There's no real set time to when it flowers because it does this when conditions are best. Our first year with this species involved just cutting the seed heads to prevent it from spreading any further, as it had been reported to us late in the season. This year, we took a more in-depth approach and dug up all the plants we could. Only a few small plants remained by the end of the season, which we know won't cause spread since it only spreads by seed. We could have just cut off the flower heads, but the patch was so large that leaving stems behind would have exposed staff to the sap as they walked through it. Also, we predict that this year we will be able to get out in the early spring and use a stirrup hoe on it because there will be small seedlings that have germinated from the seeds rather than medium-sized or large-sized plants. This was a great year for refining our personal protective equipment and our protocols. Of course, because of its phototoxic sap, management must be done extra carefully to avoid anybody receiving a burn. The protective gear we would highly recommend for management is waterproof disposable coveralls, non-absorbent clothing underneath that, waterproof gloves, eyeglasses, face shields, rubber boots, and sunscreen applied in advance just in case you were to get that sap on your skin. We have a safety protocol that we have in place for our work, and we would happily share it with anybody who needs it. A few things we learned along the way was that taping gloves help prevent anything from riding up and down on the arms. So you can see this pictured on the right with duct tape wrapped around. We switched to always making sure we were wearing our goggles underneath our face shields because especially when bagging up things, because that hogweed sap splashes back at you, and you definitely do not want that in your eyes. When putting things in the bag, that is one of the most dangerous parts. You make sure to tuck your chin in right against your chest so that nothing comes up your face shield. It's also important this coming season to plan a bit more on how we want to handle our water breaks, because taking off those gloves and handling your water bottle is a point of hazard because you might not really be thinking, it might be hot, you might accidentally touch something. And so we do need a system in place to prevent any risk here. We know from experience that days in the suit are hot, especially with the humidity. And so it's definitely important to plan short days when managing this species. We were lucky that this site was right near a home. And so we were able to use a hose and tap for rinsing off any gear at the end of the day before taking it home. And it's also really important to have some kind of wash station like this in case someone was to get sap on them. There was a few times that we went and rinsed off because we were a little bit concerned, and it's so hard to tell if you were exposed until you were to get in a reaction. And so you want somewhere that you can reliably rinse your skin for a few minutes. So either a giant jug of water that you kind of haul into a site or some kind of running hose. If you were to get sap on you, it's important to stay out of the sunlight anyways, even though you've rinsed, but just having that extra rinse gives you that peace of mind. This is Japanese knotweed. Many are familiar with this plant as it's widespread on PEI and has serious impacts economically, environmentally, and socially. It is amongst the most widespread and problematic invasive species on PEI and in the world. It's definitely one we receive the greatest number of questions and concerns about, as this species has dramatic impacts. It creates a monoculture aided by its ability to release chemicals in the soil that hinder the growth of nearby plants. It also grows very quickly in the spring and monopolizes sunlight. It readily invades stream edges, which is particularly harmful when its stems die back in the winter and leave the area prone to increased erosion. As I mentioned earlier, improper management techniques of this species, like digging, can actually worsen its spread. Tarping is an excellent method of control. Many members of our council have used this technique with their past work, and we used it in 2021 and 2022 field seasons. This year was our biggest site. This is a site in Clear Springs, up towards Surrey Way, and we had great success with it. We explored in detail the costs of different landscaping fabric that would be most effective for tarping. We found that silage plastic was the best resource, as it's made up of high-density polyethylene material that is durable, tear-resistant, and UV stabilized to withstand prolonged exposure to sunlight. It's also the most cost-effective at 0.06 cents a square foot compared to the average 0.09 cents or 16 cents a square foot. You can buy a 40 by 100 foot roll of 6 millimeter thick plastic for $275 from Phillips Agri-Services. Someone local donated us wood chips for our knotweed project, and we took a few truckloads to the site and laid it over top of the tarp as to experiment to see if it would help weigh it down. Water collected on this tarp and combined with these chips and was effective in weighing it down. And in the winter, it froze. It actually held up against Fiona as well and kept our tarp in place in that section. If you would like to hear more about this process, our council has created a set of visually engaging guides and videos to help you in your efforts. This year, we developed 2 new resources thanks to the financial support of the PEI Wildlife Conservation Fund to guide islanders through this process. So we have a photo guide and a webinar. So check them out on our website. This is an invasive known as yellow archangel. As we are aware, it has limited distribution on PEI currently. It's a plant that spreads vigorously by runners. This site was reported to us by the Stratford Watershed Group, who invited us to assist in its management. As we examined the area together, we observed this species had established itself because it was clearly a dumping site for residents to dispose of their garden waste. There was plastic pots and perlite scattered about. This is a known pathway for invasive species introductions, and so it's not that surprising we would have found some invasives here. Our group first got to work hand pulling. We had read online this could be an effective tool for management if it was done in a small enough patch. We didn't exactly know what a small patch meant at first, but soon came to realize that even with almost a dozen people for a whole day, we would have gotten nowhere with our management. We switched gears and decided to tarp the plants, as this was an effective technique for species like goutweed, which is a plant similar in nature. We did not have any material available for this project at the time. If you can form a partnership with a lumberyard, you can get lumber tarps, which is a great free resource for tarping invasive species. Although these are white, and we are unsure of their efficacy at this point, they can do in a pinch when no other materials are available, and it's recycling. We have used them at a few locations this year at sites we'll be checking back on, and we will monitor their progress. A downside to them is that they're often torn, and so they will need to be overlapped, but they are a great free resource. This plant is small flowered jewelweed. Staff were invited out to assist in the management of this forest invader, an annual plant that creates a monoculture in the understory. This plant has explosive seed pods that can produce 1,000 to 2,000 seeds per plant. Upon arrival, staff spread out and got to work pulling this species. However, we quickly realized the importance of targeting this plant where satellite populations occurred. If you hadn't heard of satellite populations, these are plants that appear on the outskirts of a main patch. These plants are likely to cause the furthest spread of the plant, and so important are to target first to contain patch as best as possible, especially when you know you won't be able to remove all of the plants before they go to seed. Staff quickly moved to the edges and worked their way inwards. The council goes through a lot of plastic bags in a season. In the interest of recycling and cost, we began using feed bags to dispose of invasives when possible. Small flower jewelweed is a great opportunity for this because they are small and many can fit into these bags. These bags are quite durable, and we were grateful to receive the donation from the public, and so they were free to us. Using zip ties is an effective way to close them to reduce spillage during travel. This is Himalayan balsam. It is an annual herbaceous plant that grows to 2 meters tall. It has distinct cone-shaped irregular pink or white flowers that have a sac structure some refer to as being helmet-shaped. It has green, bamboo-like stems that are hollow. These can also be red when they're younger, or even transparent if they're growing in the woods in shaded conditions. There's an ongoing use of this plant as an ornamental, and so it can be considered a garden escapee. It can spread to new areas through contaminated soils, and beekeepers have been known to intentionally plant this species for its high nectar content. It is an annual plant that dies back in the winter and leaves banks exposed, increasing erosion. Its seeds form in mid-August and are viable for 1.5 years in the soil, which is relatively short in the plant world. They shoot 7 meters from the parent plant, and they can actually spread in waterways and even germinate underwater. If you're looking to conduct some management, we had great experience pulling it. This is great for small to medium infestations. It is not very hard. They come out of the ground easily and in one piece because their roots are very shallow. And it's a great one to encourage children to tag along with because it's not a plant that causes any kind of skin reactions. For larger patches, we dealt with one this year that was like a thick monoculture. We pulled it for a day and really just put a small dent in it. And so we were reading that you can actually cut it below the first node and monitor the site for regrowth. So we might do that this year at that patch and monitor its progress to see how successful that could be for us. We were grateful to have a new brush cutter in our toolkit this season. We did not use it yet at the Himalayan balsam site, but we think it could be incorporated. This brush cutter so far has been useful in a number of settings, including at a knotweed site we managed in Charlottetown for a demonstration. Staff used this brush cutter to cut knotweed down before tarping. This saved us from getting down on our hands and knees and using hand saws to cut it. It also significantly sped up the process. The blade easily cut through the knotweed in one swipe and did not result in many stem fragments. Even if it had, the site was going to be tarped, and so that was not a large concern for us. The brush cutter was easy to use, and with a quick demonstration, every staff member was able to use it. I'll show you a video here of Laura using it on a knotweed patch. As you can see, it has straps that hold the weight. So using this tool is not taxing at all. This is wild cucumber. It was a first year for staff managing this species. It is another herbaceous annual. However, this differs because it is a vine. Since it's an annual, the strategy is the same in that we try to prevent seed set. The viability of the seed bank is unknown for this species. However, depleting the seeds that go into it each year will save you lots of effort in the long run. If you perform management late in the season, your focus may shift to just removing seed pods, as the vine will die off anyways. As you can see in this picture, this is what we did for this late management. This is us managing glossy buckthorn. It is our staff's second year managing this plant, although the first year for our current staff. The shrubs can get quite large. These pictures are young shrubs, but they still were quite tricky to pull out as their root systems are strong and can wrap themselves around other roots to gain a strong foothold. We are grateful for the invention of the extractigator. If you've been pulling large shrubs but don't have this tool in your belt, we seriously recommend getting one. They are about $170 before tax and cost about $50 to ship. They will save you hours of work. I have a video of it on the next slide to show you. So in this video, he's using it to remove alder trees. And as you can see, he just uses it as a lever to leverage against the ground. He repositioned it twice, and good as that, it was out. This is Scotch broom. This was that yellow shrub that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about our survey methods. I mentioned we had done some management along the road, and this was a first for management for our staff. This shrub reproduces only by seed, and as I mentioned, it can shoot its seed up to 5 meters from the parent plant. This shrub was another one that we were grateful to have the extractigator for. When managing this species, we focused on the outliers so we could contain it to an area, while we helped the landowner identify the problem and advise on the course of action. This is black knapweed. It is a priority invader that is not yet known to be widespread on PEI. However, we did receive 2 reports of it this year and found a few patches ourselves. Knapweed does have a first and second year plant, and it only spreads by going to seed. The seed bank lasts from 5 to 8 years, and if you manage it before it gets to that second year plant, we expect you could control it within this period. Pulling this plant is effective. The picture is from on the right is from a patch up west. It was just a handful of plants, including a few first year ones. These were pulled, and the site will continue to be monitored. The next site we found, knapweed at, was so large it would not be possible to hand pull. This is a patch of knapweed down east. It's much larger than the picture entails, and the grass you can see in the top right is full of first-year plants. This site could be mowed monthly to control, and the machine would need to be thoroughly cleaned each time, as mowers are pathways for invasive species spread, as they could drag seed around. There's evidence of it dragging seed around, actually, as the other place the mower clearly travels also has a few scattered knapweed plants emerging from this site. This is yellow flag iris. It is an emergent plant, which means that its roots survive in standing water while its leaves and flowers sit above. It can survive in fresh and salt water and reproduces by seed and also spreads vigorously by its root systems, which encroach into a waterway about 10 inches a year. There are several techniques that work well with this plant. However, that certainly depends on the size of your site and the location of your patch. The plant roots can survive drought conditions and be found in gardens, and this is an instance where it would be effective to dig it up. It is not recommended to dig if they sit in water, as root fragments can dislodge and travel downstream and start new plants. If plants are in standing water, you can cut the leaves below the water surface on a regular basis to keep the plant deprived of oxygen. If you are late to the game seasonally and the plant has produced seeds, we recommend cutting the seed heads and bagging them. The picture on the right is from a site in Kensington. It is near the headwaters of a creek. We chose to trial some benthic mat installation at this site as there was a monoculture virus. We were grateful for the Wildlife Conservation Fund to have supported us in this initiative. If you are unfamiliar with the term benthic, it refers to anything associated with or occurring on the bottom of a body of water. These mats are a new tool to us, and they sit on the bottom of a body of water, preventing the plant from photosynthesizing and respiring. These types of mats are helpful to control aquatic invasive plants that are rooted at the bottom, which would be otherwise hard to target. We were inspired to trial this technique as recent studies have suggested that native cattails can recolonize the area well after the iris is controlled and the mat is removed. The mats we put in covered approximately 100 meters squared, which is about half the iris present at the site. In the future, the mat can be shifted over to cover the rest of the population. But in the meantime, we cut the seed heads off when they form to prevent long-distance dispersal. We are uncertain how long the mat will need to remain. Some trials have shown that it can be controlled within 70 days. However, that was in standing water year-round, and our site is a seasonally dry site, and so we may not see as quick of results. If you are interested in possibly trialing a benthic mat, we have created a 2-page photo guide to showcase how we built and installed our mats so that you can use our experience to plan for your own projects. You can find this guide by searching benthic mats in the search bar on our website. If you're wondering about the costs, the barriers we built covered about 100 square meters and cost about $1,100 after tax. So that included the price of rebar, cable ties, duct tape, cinder blocks, and fabric. So you can buy them actually already made on canadianpond.ca. They have comparable mats to our size, so they had 92 square meters of space, which was about $1,300, and they offer free shipping. It would save labor costs to just buy them, as it took us 2 days to build ours and a day of shopping. However, one of the benefits of creating your own mats is that you can customize it to your exact site. And we also have equipment like zip ties and duct tape left over from our purchase for repairs. While it's not the most structured or effective type of management, species that are ubiquitous, meaning widespread, we do pull in our travels, especially if we don't see much of it in an area. Some species we have done this with would be like tansy ragwort or bittersweet nightshade. Ragwort is especially dangerous for ruminants, and so as an animal lover, it gives us the extra motivation to yank it out when possible. And nightshade can also cause huge problem in streams, creating false mats. And so when we're near streams, we also enjoy pulling out the species if we get a few minutes. It is important to know if pulling is even an effective strategy for the species that you're deciding to do this with. And we carry garbage bags on us for this reason, so that we can just kind of tuck them away and take them home and throw them by our black bin and write invasive species on them so that they get taken out. So, given all of our experience this past field season, we do have some considerations that we want to make sure we're thinking about coming next field season. And so I'll go over these together over the next slides. So record keeping. So we'd like to standardize how we track our management efforts in the field and in the office. So invasive management occurs over a multi-year period. Over the last 2 field seasons, our management capacity has really grown. And so formalizing this can help us keep track of this better in future years and evaluate our work more each season. This year, we will have a really good handle on our necessary management timings for priority plants across PEI, because we've created this guide to help organize the identification and management efforts, and we'll be referencing it throughout the season. This guide has a planning section and also a written identification section, which you can see here on the right. And then it also has a photo guide as well as a management guide. Now, this whole document is actually also complemented by a spreadsheet that organizes these efforts so a land manager can view these timings at a glance. As you can see in this picture, the months are organized in columns at the top, and at a frame on the left are plant species organized in rows. So you'll be able to see, what is the best strategy for conducting management on black knapweed in May and kind of line that up. And we are excited to be releasing this guide very shortly, and it should be out in time for the field season. So this year, staff are also experienced enough to know that getting on the ground early is important, and we have some species in mind that we're excited to try out for the first time this year, and we can't wait to update you on those as well. So there are two great guides that we look forward to referencing during our riparian work this year. There's a document on the left that we created with the support of the Climate Action Fund with the province. It's a riparian monitoring and management protocol with invasive species considerations in mind. It highlights these considerations and covers things like how to limit erosion and balance habitat shifts while removing species. One of my favorite sections in it is the seasonal timings and management section, which has considerations on fish, plants, birds, invertebrates, and even shellfish. So we think people will find this document most helpful. It's in its first edition, so any feedback is definitely welcome. And then the other document, which is on the right here, was created by the Watershed Alliance, and it highlights how native species can be used in watersheds and details a number of techniques and species that will be of use in live staking, and also provides information on how to best propagate them. So while we have always considered species at risk in our work, we are excited with this new tool we learned about recently that is called NatureServe Explorer Pro. It's an online platform that can show us what rare and at-risk species have been surveyed for and found present in an area we might be working. And so we plan to incorporate this tool in our site planning so we can be sure that we are taking the highest precautions when undergoing management in different sites. We also hope to learn some bird calls so we can make reports of any at-risk species while we're out to support species at-risk distribution mapping. So another consideration we have for this year is remediation, which is the process of returning a site from its degraded condition to a site that is planted with native species and contributing back to healthy ecosystems. So invasive management often takes years of control efforts, and this might mean it can be years before certain sites can be restored, like in instances when we tarp a species. If a site isn't remediated after the removal of a tarp, this may make the site likely to be reinvaded by other invasives. We want to be sure that we're ready for this transition of our sites, and we hope to experiment this year ways in which we can make this a structured and accessible part of our management on PEI. One of the components of remediation is, of course, planting. Choosing species that are likely to do well at the site's conditions is important, and they need to be strong enough to outcompete the invader with some help. Pictured on the left here is fireweed, which is a personal favorite plant. This species grows up to 2 meters tall and sprouts early in the season. It readily colonizes disturbed sites and helps prevent erosion. It also is great for pollinators, as it is a late nectar source due to its blooming in July and August. This plant is easily outcompeted by shrubs and trees, and so it's possibly a great choice for replanting sites and keeping freshly disturbed soil in place. And then on the right, this is Canada goldenrod. This species is an important native species that often gets blamed for seasonal allergies, known as hay fever. However, this is untrue and is actually likely due to a weed called ragweed. We have many species of goldenrod on PEI, and all are native. When I see a field like this with Canada goldenrod, I see it as a great opportunity to collect seed sources for large disturbed sites, as goldenrod does well in disturbed sites. It's certainly a widespread species that does not need our help in spreading. And while I usually would like to plant rarer species, this can be a great resource, as I mentioned, for larger sites when you need to collect a lot of seed. Of course, remediation is more than just replanting, as certain invasives leave lasting effects on soil makeups, and so they may require amendments to fix up the soil to be suitable for more desirable plants. If you're new to the term amendment, it just means adding material to the soil to improve its physical properties, such as water retention, permeability, water infiltration, drainage, aeration, and structure. And this helps establish healthy bacteria and fungal communities in the soils. You can add compost or actual purchased commercial soil amendments and conditioners, or you could add leaf litter and plant nitrogen fixing plants and work them back in the soil. So this year we did have a bit of experience with some remediation. At the yellow flag iris site we worked at, where we installed those benthic mats, the landowner had actually been a bit disappointed that she'd be losing her yellow irises, and she hadn't realized that they were invasive. And so this was a good opportunity for us to kind of dip our toes in, and we went out and purchased some blue flag iris, which is actually, in my opinion, a nicer species looking even. So she was quite excited that we were able to put some in her property there, and it'll be fun to track and see how well they do at the site. The disposal of invasive species is an important consideration when planning for invasives, and it has been since we began management. Just to showcase a few examples of how important it is, you can take a look at the left at Himalayan balsam. The stem had been trampled and laying in the soil at some point. You can see that along the stem where the node was, the new roots started to grow. If we were to leave piles of this plant scattered on the bare soil, we would come back to finding it regrown in no time. Another example we can see on the left with this giant hogweed seeds. The seeds in the middle are unripe. One could assume that because they are not yet viable, we could cut the plant and leave them behind, but this would be a mistake, as the seeds can continue to ripen even after the seed head is cut from the stem. It's important to always remove seed heads from a site. In the past, our practice has been to remove all plant materials from a site and bring them to PEI energy systems for incineration. This year, we began evaluating other means of disposal for a few reasons. The first being, it's a barrier to some that large amounts of invasive species require a truck to be transported to the disposal site. When you're transporting amounts of invasive species on PEI, you are also supposed to have a hazardous waste disposal permit from the government. The incinerator will ask you for it when you arrive. The cost of this is likely to discourage individuals from transporting. The transport of invasives is also a delicate matter, as we want to avoid spreading species. So unnecessarily travel could pose unnecessary risk. We also don't want to be wasting resources or contributing to extra driving emissions. Surprisingly, bagging the plants is actually also a pretty exhaustive activity, especially when you need to drag the bags back to where you parked. This year, we managed a large knotweed site and decided to leave behind a pile. We monitored the pile, and after each return, did not find it to be a significant issue of regrowth. Evaluating disposal options going forward, we will take many factors into consideration, like whether the plant is a risk to public health if it's left behind, whether it is in a secluded versus well-traveled path. Perhaps if a plant has nodes like Himalayan balsam did, we could put a tarp underneath. It is also worth evaluating if the materials are likely to stay in place during high winds, like Fiona. We look forward to updating you on some of our new disposal methods in the following season. Since this is the first field season since Fiona, we expect to possibly be using our chainsaw a bit more. We have had a staff member participate in the McPhail's Advanced Felling Tactics and Storm Damage training, and this will be handy if there are some management sites that require clearing post-Fiona. There are also invasive trees we could consider using our saw for, although we currently don't have any plans to do so. Invasive trees in our region include Norway maple, sycamore maple, and Scots pine, amongst others. Building relationships is something that has been at the forefront of our work for many years, and it will continue to be. Invasive species affect everyone, whether you are aware of it or not. We look forward to partnering with groups who are outdoors often so that we might encourage them to become citizen scientists that help us report invasive species across PEI, and possibly even have them interested in doing management. An example of a collaboration we underwent last year was designing some rack cards about invasive species for the Women's Institute Roadside Cleanup Day. These cards highlighted the importance of biosecurity, 2 priority invaders that would possibly be out the time that they were in the ditches, and how to report these species, as well as a safety message about plants with phototoxic sap. On the topic of biosecurity in the field, we wanted to highlight some of our field measures. Since 2021 field season, staff have used tools to clean the bottom of their boots after management, including when serving areas with invasive species present. Things like vegetable brushes, old toothbrushes, or in this picture, even a Javix brush, all work well. Staff upgraded this year to official boot brushes, and they work much better, as their bristles are stiff and they have a pick on the back of them. I found out recently they are much the same as horse hoof brushes, which is pictured here on the left. So if you are looking to buy some of these in bulk, it may be worth exploring that option further. So in this final section, I will highlight a few invasives not yet found on PEI, but that are possibly future invaders. It is our goal to prevent the introduction of these species when possible and have an early detection and rapid response to them. We encourage everyone to keep these species in mind and help us by making reports and choosing to adjust our behaviors to prevent their introduction. The first species I will talk about is oak wilt. It is a vascular disease of oak trees that is caused by a fungus. The fungus develops in the outer sapwood of the tree and causes the tree's defensive system to restrict its flow of water and nutrients, which results in the tree wilting and dying. Our provincial tree, the red oak, has shown no resistance to this disease to date, and unfortunately, it has shown 100% mortality. The fungal disease spreads both below and above ground. Below ground, this disease can spread 50 to 75 feet per year through interconnected root systems. Above ground, wilt spreads through attaching its fungal spores to the bark beetles and sap beetles and firewood. Avoid pruning trees from April to July to prevent the spread of this vascular disease. A wounded tree is a beacon to insects in an area. One insect species that transmit the disease is known to arrive on oak surfaces within 10 minutes of that harm. A sign of this disease is leaf discoloration from the outside of the leaf moving towards the insides. This highlights the real importance of not moving firewood any further than we have to, and certainly not moving firewood onto PEI. Jumping worms are the next species I'd like to talk about today. The Asian jumping worm has been found for the first time in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in the past couple of years. Similar in size to the more common European earthworm, which is another invasive species, the mature worm differs from the European by having a band all the way around its body instead of only partway around. The worms are usually gray or brown in color. The narrow ring around their body is smooth and white or gray in color, unlike other species where the band is raised and more pink. The biggest telltale sign and the inspiration behind their name is this behavior. They jump, thrash, and can also shed their tails in defense. These jumping worms can reach higher densities and reproduce more quickly than other earthworms. As they burrow and consume organic matter, the soil they leave behind turns dry and granular in material, much like coffee grounds. They are voracious feeders and can deplete soil of valuable nutrients and can displace helpful soil bacteria and fungi, leaving a soil sterile. It is important that we purchase our plants from local nurseries when possible, as potted plants from off-island could have these worms in the soil without us even realizing, or possibly not even adult worms, but just the eggs of these worms. Hemlock woolly adelgid is the third species I'd like to talk to you about today. It is an invasive aphid-like insect that causes mortality in our native and ecologically important hemlock trees. It feeds on the base of needles, which causes defoliation and can kill a host tree in as little as 4 years. This species is not yet present on PEI, but it is found in southern Nova Scotia and a few spots in Ontario and British Columbia. Movement of firewood by humans can also speed up the hemlock woolly adelgid spread, as this pest can hide easily on or even within wood. The spotted lanternfly in the middle is an insect that is a large plant hopper and member of the order of true bugs. Adults have white wings spotted black, orange, brown, and white underwings, and black legs. They emerge in July. Their eggs are often what results in their spread, as their eggs are coated in a yellowish-brown waxy substance that hardens over time and cracks, gaining a muddy look. They can be laid on essentially any smooth surface and be found from September to May. This species is not currently known to be established in Canada, but it is anticipated that this insect will cross our borders within the next several years. The extent of this species' impact ecologically are unknown. They do use maples, willows, and poplars as hosts, but to date, no mortality has occurred. That being said, they are likely to cause stress to these trees, which may result in other invasives and diseases attacking these trees. The biggest known concern regarding this species is its devastating impact on the fruit-growing industry, including grapes. Forests would also be much less enjoyable for recreationists, as the honeydew secreted by these insects is sweet and accumulates at the base of trees, which grows mold and attracts wasps and other stinging insects. And finally, I would like to highlight the zebra mussel, which is an invasive freshwater mussel that gets its name from its striped pattern on its shell. This species was recently confirmed in New Brunswick. This mussel's impact on the water body is dramatic. They multiply quickly and filter feed phytoplankton out of the stream, essentially starving all other life forms dependent on these streams. These mussels also create toxins as they filter and can cause botulism in mussel eating and fish and waterfowl. They are also known to be very sharp and cut the feet of swimmers. Their larvae are known as veligers, and these are so small we can't see them with our naked eye. They can travel in just a few drops of water, and so this highlights the importance of making sure our boats are cleaned, drained, and dried before moving between bodies of water. If you are an organization looking to help prevent the spread of invasive species through pathways, we encourage you to reach out to us to ask about our partner toolkit. This highlights 5 behavior programs that prevent the spread of invasive species. Thank you for your attention and time today. We wish you a happy 2023 growing season and encourage you to reach out with us with any questions.